This November is the most important election of our lifetime.
And yes, people say that every year.
But this time, it's actually true.
So Pod Save America is heading out on the road.
Florida, Texas, Pennsylvania, California.
To talk to the candidates and activists and voters. It's a political conversation for anyone who's not ready to give up
Or go insane.
So much is at stake.
If this isn't who we are,
It's time to prove it.
now.
Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks to everyone watching on our live stream, wherever you are. We really appreciate it. And we're so excited to have you guys here tonight. This is a really special film. And I get to see Paul directing backstage a little bit just a second ago. Everyone was being a little too loud in the back.
Could you guys hear us back there? No, seriously.
Well directed.
Thank you.
We have lots to talk about, and we love to feature films here at ScreenTimes that leave us with a lot to talk about. And I think it's just such a wonderful piece of work. But first, I want to start off with something slightly silly. The whole film takes place, we see everything that happens through Joe's eyes, this 14-year-old. And I'm wondering how much the four of you have been thinking about being 14 as you watch this film and the sort of odd things you think as a 14-year-old. What film meant the most to you, think, when you were 14 years old?
Wow. Great.
The meant the most.
I mean, so in the book, Joe, in the book Wildlife by Richard Ford, Joe is 16, and part of the reason I think we made him 14 was because that's the year that I moved to a new town and didn't know anybody in your family, sort of what you have. And I remember, I'm pretty sure, the first day of school wearing either a Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd t-shirt, like trying to make the right impression. And I was really short, and I wore glasses, and I was like...
How'd it go? How'd the first day go?
What would it feel like to be 14? That's the first thing that popped in my head, was like choosing the shirt for the first day of school.
Oh my God, yeah.
And wanting to be cool, because you knew classic rock.
Did it work? Did somebody walk up to you and was like, man, I love Zeppelin too?
I don't remember that part.
Probably not.
No. But films,
I don't remember. I think I was at boarding. I'd just gone to boarding school. I don't know if I was 14, but I remember we had a common room, and the only film we had was Elizabeth with Cate Blanchett, and we would just watch it like over and over and over and over and over again. And so I was like, oh, that's what I want. You know, she sort of became this giant idol and has remained so. But yeah, I watched Elizabeth like 50 times within the space of a year. That's the only film I can remember existed at that time.
I feel like Dead Presidents.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm really trying to get in there. Goonies was the first thing I thought of, because it's just continued to be my favorite film. All through, up to this day. But I think Dead Presidents, 14, yeah, right? I might be wrong in terms of time frame, but.
Yeah, so Dead President you felt like really spoke to you, your experience.
Yeah, it was weird. I don't know what it was about that movie. I think I remember sort of images from different ages. I don't remember movies, but I remember vivid moments in movies that affected me throughout, growing up. I don't remember movies themselves fully.
What's an example of an image like that? I gotta ask the follow-up.
Give me a moment. I'll have to sort through some really disturbing. No, but I remember their masks in that movie. I remember that very specifically.
And now you feel like someone who wears a mask.
Yes,
No.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Christian Slater and Gleaming the Cube. There are a lot of different references. Yeah. Images.
I think I asked that same question. Do you remember when, Ed, you and I were together?
Yeah.
And we did some writing together?
Yeah.
Ed, who plays the 14-year-old.
The kid Joe, just to kind of open things up, not to rehearse scenes. I think one of the kind of things we talked about / wrote about was being 14, I think.
And he was like, well, last year was so long ago.
Yeah, he was 15, playing 14.
Huge difference.
But I think we tried to recall what it felt like at that time.
Yeah, I've got...
What did he say about 14? Do you remember?
everything was awesome. Ed's the most possessed, you know, mature, wonderful person, but everything is golden lit. You know, he's just completely. He's like a ray of sunshine and always happy and always prepared and ready to work and not really afraid of anything. So we were all like, "Who are you? How do you not? How are you not crippled by fear? Teach us."
He's Australian.
He's Australian.
We were like, okay, so we'll get you a dialect coach. And he's like, I don't need one. We were like, well, we have one for Carrie. He's like, I'm good. Anyone who's not scared to act with you guys is like a pretty confident teenager.
Yeah.
I do remember the pain of that time, you know, breaking through from childhood into adolescence is a different, you know, is a different kind of birth, you know? And I remember specifically when I was talking to Paul about the film, after having read the script for the first time, about that period of time in his life and his parents, and relating so deeply with the end of this film, and my own experience at that age, but also just my parents and their profound complications that I could feel, but I couldn't seem to put into words or express or do anything really about. You know, I was stuck, as we all are at that time, if we're lucky enough to have both parents, no matter how complicated it might be. And I think it's that struggle to break through, to hold on to the things that you feel like are the right lessons, and then at the same time, try and let go, because that's the thing that you feel like you're learning from culture and society that's telling you to like let go of these things, and that mess of stuff and that pain. And I would even say that the pace of that time, which at that time you want everything to happen so fast in a weird way, but it is moving at the pace that Paul has made in this movie, which is there is this sort of there's a slow movement through that time that will stay with you kind of forever, and that is what I think he's captured so beautifully in this movie. And every time I see it, you feel that feeling again, whatever that is specifically for yourself.
Like a week can feel like a year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then for you, Paul, like it's a big choice deciding what the material is going to be for your first film. You know, in that sense, this kid's experience being the lens that you were going to sort of tell your first story on screen. Why this? There's a lot of great books out there. There's a lot of great. Ford has a lot of great books out there.
Yeah.
Why this one? Why this story?
You know, the first sentence and first paragraph of the book remain one of my favorites ever. So I was just sort of in, you know, immediately as a reader, and felt very connected to the characters, to the language. I think it reminded me of myself and my parents and my grandparents. And sort of through the kid's point of view, but the mystery of who our parents are felt particularly almost haunting to me, or intoxicating, or something. Like I wanted to know more, and almost by writing or making a film, trying to understand something, you know, understand Jerry and Jeanette. And I think in earlier drafts, Zoe and I even had more scenes of them separately, as if to try to understand why things can fall apart or crash together, or whatever it is.
And also drafts with fewer scenes of the parents. Like we tried ones that stuck solely to the child's perspective. Like let's be very rigorous about that. And those felt like suddenly the scope of the novel would disappear, or the scope of the film. And so we knew we needed some of their independent life, but how much we figured out really over the editing process.
Yeah.
And so, and the story of you two working together is so interesting, because it begins with you working on this for a while on your own, right? And I guess not showing a whole lot of it at some point?
Well, yeah, so I was in love with the book, but didn't know how I was going to make a film of it. Thought I even might try to hire a writer, but daydreamed about it for about a year. And when I thought of the ending of the film and the final image, really, that's when I thought, you know what? I think that's something, and I'm going to try to write it, almost as an experiment. So I wrote a first draft, actually in the hotel room while we were filming Prisoners in Atlanta, is where I wrote, and it wasn't in screenplay format. It was just me kind of, but I started to think it was pretty good. And so I gave it to Zoe. I was like, I think I wrote the screenplay. She tore it apart. And
how did he take the criticism?
Well, not well. Yeah. I mean, there was every page was dog-eared and with paper. I mean, with pen on the paper and whatever. So we didn't get through our note session.
We got 5 pages into our note session. 5 script pages.
It ended early, and we've been telling this story, and we've kind of been understanding it like
trying to hone in on the truth.
Yeah, we each have a different story. Yes, that's right. I think. What was going through your head?
I mean, when Paul said to me, I want to take a stab at it, he was like, I think I don't even know if I'm going to write the script, but to start my directing process, I'm going to start to adapt it. And then he was very proudly handed me, it was like, this is it. And it definitely needed a little help. And yeah, I just was like, I think it will be faster if I rewrite you than to give you notes, because he's so stubborn. And so I took it for a little while, which he was very, very happily turned it over. Would not take a single note from me, but happily turned it over.
Yeah.
And then the first thing I did was physically cut up his script and laid it out on our living room floor and started rearranging things, because the book has a very different structure.
So Paul's literally walking past you, chopping the script into little bits.
He was back in Atlanta at that point shooting Prisoners. I think he was alone. But yes, very, Freud would make a lot of that probably. But then we had this kind of lovely, beautiful, conflict-free process where one of us would take the script for a while and do a draft, and the other one would go off and act in something, and then we would trade it back and forth for about 3 or 4 years.
I find this so fascinating. What did you learn about each other's sensibilities? I mean, you must have gotten to know each other in a different way. You obviously have known each other for over a decade and whatnot. But did you get to know each other differently as artists?
Well, actually, I think when I gave this book to Zoe to read, I was like, what do you think? Could it be a movie? She was like, of course, Paul loves this. Do you know, even the aesthetics of it?
Yes.
I feel like that is something we already share a little bit.
But also, it's so you. It's like looking at a picture of you reading this book. And in that way, I felt writing this script with Paul felt more to me like an acting exercise almost than anything. I was like, how does Paul think? If Paul had access to all of my brain, what would he make of it? That kind of thing. Also, we've been a couple for over a decade, as you said, and there's that thing that they say about couples that they use each other's brains like a computer with an extra hard drive. One person remembers where the keys are. It's just some version of that. How can I talk about this so it sounds You're great. Keep going.
They just had a baby. They're kind of tired.
This sounds creepier and creepier.
Now there's another brain that they can wire. That's great. That'd be great.
I'm so curious that moment when you look at this book and you're like, oh, of course this. What was it that rang so Paul to you about this book?
Well, Paul always says he loves the illusion of simplicity, things that are actually very difficult. And when he was talking to our production designer and costume designer and stuff, he kept saying, the movie should be like sushi. It should look really, really simple and actually take a lot of skill to make everything. And the book reads like that. It's incredibly, the prose is so spare. There's very little description of anything. There's very little emotional description. It's kind of the lines stand for themselves, the characters stand for themselves. It's profoundly mysterious. And then it's also just devastating emotionally, which he is every day, so.
Paul had mentioned that this has this extraordinary first line, this novel. The line is, in the fall of 1960, when I was 16, and my father was for a time not working, my mother met a man named Warren Miller, and fell in love with him. And there's such a spare, you're talking about the simplicity to that line. I'm wondering, Carrie and Jake, your performances in this film, how do you think, how does that kind of spareness to the way the novel is written translate to performance? At all?
I'm more interested in this brain stuff.
Yeah, we'll go back to it.
I mean, I think there's more of the complexity sort of really off screen with Jerry. I think the time that you spend with her, with Jeanette, the time you spend with the two of them together. I believe that, you know, acting is a odd profession. But I sitting up here with all actors who are all, they're all incredible. I'm sure they all have different ideas of what they believe to be fascinating about acting, and I believe that simplicity in acting is what I try and strive for. Maybe I just am simple, and that's what I like to commend. But I think that is beautiful, and those are the performances that I admire. So I don't know, in terms of, and that's not usually what I think people like to consider acting, you know?
I see you in Okja, and I think, oh, that's a lot of acting there, right? Like, whereas this,
right,
it's
yeah,
a different
or
kind
is that
like, who's
acting?
sweating
I don't
the
know
most?
what that is,
Right,
but
right.
that was a choice.
I loved it. I loved it.
It's an anime choice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, yes. But I think, you know, the hardest part, I think, is, you know, Carrie carries the film, you know, and really watching that. I watched her process and her questioning, and she came to all of us at different times, because I think that's what Jeanette was doing, was sort of holding on to whatever she could in those moments and desperately trying to find some life, you know. And there were moments, even when I was gone, after I had left filming, where Carrie would call me and ask me things that, you know, and that is what I can feel on that performance, and I think you feel it simmering under it most of the time, and occasionally it comes out in these extraordinary ways. And talk about complexity and simplicity in one performance. I'm not the one who should be talking.
So, Carrie, how'd you find Jeanette? I mean, it does feel like she is such a mystery. From that moment, you know, the first moment that Jerry's gone, you know, she wakes up the next morning, she's perfectly put together, and she has flipped a switch. Can you talk about, like, sort of how you make that transition, or what's going on in Jeanette's mind as she's changing?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it felt like a sort of really exciting crossword puzzle. I mean, truly, it comes along so rarely that you get a character that is so well written as a woman. And so the story had been thought out so well by Zoe and Paul. The first thing that I sort of related to in reading it was that feeling of sort of waking up and realizing that a portion of your life is over, and whatever choices you've made have led you to where you are, and that you can't have any of those years back. So I think she's had a contract with her husband, an unspoken contract that as long as he keeps trying, so will she. And for him, that's keeping his job, or if he loses it, getting another one, or keeping a smile on his face. And in return, she will be a good wife and a good mother, and she'll make do with the little that they have. And when he breaks that contract, everything that she sort of suppressed for 14 years starts to come out. So I don't know if I've got a kind of perfect map of what she goes through in that week. I think we came up with an idea of where she was. I think a lot of it was to do was her sort of trying to figure out if she had any kind of identity outside of that, of being a mother and being a wife. The idea of who she could have been had her life taken a different turn, at the same time trying to make, survive, to have money and to be able to put clothes on her kid. And, she's catastrophizing in that moment. She thinks that, there's a part of her that thinks he'll never come back again. So I think there is an element to it being the 1960s and her having to, take control. And in a sometimes misguided way that she does that. So I think there's just a plethora of things going on, and we kind of worked out together as we went through what it was. But going into the film, I didn't know what the route through her story was, other than that I really wanted to have a crack at it and trusted that Paul, you know, would be able to help me. That Zoe, who'd written the script with Paul, had layered everything in there for me to sort of figure out. And then I had, you know, the acting partner of all acting partners to push me, you know, as far as we went together in all of those scenes.
Yeah. And Paul, as you're working with these actors, you know, being an extraordinary actor yourself, was this an opportunity to be the kind of director you wanted yourself?
Well, yeah, I think so. I was really excited about sort of hopefully creating like a space for everybody to just be their best self, essentially, crew included. You know, I do think everything goes into the camera, is the feeling you want sort of on set, a sense of care. And then I love the feeling as an actor when I come to set and there's just like a certain temperature. And so I hope that because the film is also shot somewhat sort of economically, we really got to go to work when these guys were there. You know, it wasn't a, let's do a couple takes and move on. It was like, let's search, let's mess around a little bit, and let's hope for a happy accident and see if something comes out. And I think a part of that is because while the film is very composed, it's the actor's inner life that is the movement in the film, I think. So what you were saying before about simplicity in performance, you know, it's a very, 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 very high level of work that these guys are doing to sort of fill the space between the lines, which I think and hopefully is where the film lives. I feel like life is like that, and it's not all about what we say. And you know, the way the film is made would simply not be possible without Carrie, Jake, Ed, and Bill filling out that space and filling out these characters and trusting me, and you know, I'm very, very, very grateful.
But I would also just add, you know, there were moments where Paul empathized completely, you know, with our experience, and allowed for the moments that he's talking about where we did explore. And then there were these pretty extraordinary moments where he was very clear about what he wanted the image to be, when he wanted it to be. Had spent so much time picturing what that image would be based on where the sun was setting, and you know, there's one particular house that he had seen and he had pictured, and we had probably 30 minutes to shoot very few, but some very composed shots. And as an actor, as much as you like to explore and you like to have the opportunity to indulge and try and find things, and you know, sometimes when someone like sets a timer and says go, you literally have 30 seconds. Something else happens. And so it was a balance of moments like that and moments where we were indulged. But there was a true beauty. And I have to say, when I look back at the movie, some of my favorite moments, you know, are those moments where I was like, what is he doing? You know, like, oh God, you know, we only have 3 minutes, literally 3 minutes of sun, and we've waited here for 2.5 hours, you know? And there's something about, he is so sure, he was so sure. And I have to say, this is no joke, like, there's a reason why people are talking about what an incredible filmmaker he is in this space, because the profound confidence and skill that it takes to do what he's done as a first film, it's really rare. And it doesn't just take preparation and focus and giving your whole heart to something. It takes a skill that is inexplicable. And he has it, and any of us who've worked with many different filmmakers in our career, you know, good and not as good, will tell you that that's what makes a great director. So, I mean, look, we're all up here just like kissing each other's ass, but I really, truly, there were moments where I was like, what in the is he doing? And he knew exactly what he was doing. And that's no joke.
And some of the kudos goes to our DP.
Yeah, and our whole team.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really, it's like, as much as you think you know, it takes a village. I was so surprised by how hard it was to make the film, just to get to day one of photography. I was so surprised, because I did have a certain amount of experience, you know, as an actor.
No, but like, that we were actually shooting, you know, you're like, it's happening. I'm like, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
Good. That's what you get from Paul on any given day. How's everything? Good. How was that take? Good. Let's try it again.
I'm curious. I was reading some interviews with the author, and there's this one quote I wanted to read. Just get your feedback on this. There's a sense that we're all sort of in the position of Joe, watching these amazing performances, studying all these little details and moments that are happening. It reminded me so much of being young and trying to figure out, my own parents. And Ford has this quote where he talks about learning to be a writer, and he says, I, on the other hand, here we go. I, on the other hand, already had a personal experience of character, mine and others, which definitely stressed the incalculable, the obscure, the unpredictable. My family was given to explain almost nothing about people. People just were the mysterious sum of their actions. So, from a shortage of information, I was already making people up long before I became a writer. Actual people, just to make them seem more knowable.
Wow.
Sorry. Oh, God, that devastates me.
Yeah, I came across that last night, and it just rang so true to the experience of watching this film.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I feel like that's what I was like trying to do as well, right? Like trying to, reading the book and just wanting to understand, my own parents and Jerry and Jeanette. I mean, that's really, really beautiful. I don't know, how do you say it? Does that feel like acting to you guys in a way?
Well, maybe, Paul, maybe for you, that sense of trying to understand your own parents. Like, I am interested in this as, of all the things you could have chosen stories you could have chosen to tell, that sense that you identify with something about this story. So as you're thinking about that, do you remember those moments of just trying to read between the lines or understand this adult world that just didn't make sense to a young kid?
Yeah. I mean, we grew up. We were in a one-bedroom apartment here, so I mean, it was nice. It wasn't like we were, but it was bunk beds and a main bed. So me and my sister and my parents, we were a close family, too close, and we moved to the suburbs. And I remember when we did, and when I was 14, suddenly like a little more space and there was just more distance. And I remember just discovering that my parents had problems, that they had past lives. And suddenly it was like one day you woke up and you were, I guess, not a kid anymore. And I think that's it. I think it's that, especially when Jerry leaves, it's that, waking up, and I'm sure in life it's actually a gradual shift. I think for me, though, it felt sudden.
Mm-hmm. One thing that we experienced when we were adapting it is that in the book, Joe's observational quality, it seems very passive. That searching that he's talking about is sort of buried in the book instead of activated in the book. And one thing that we talked about was needing to weaponize his watching, that we needed to make it like incredibly active, and his need for information much more active. And I think that I see that in you, in the way that I feel like the way that you probably were with your family is now how you are in the world a little bit. Like sitting at a dinner party, you're often the person observing rather than dominating the conversation.
I'm curious, so to wrap up, I want to ask a question for the actors. If you think about the kind of director Paul's going to be, right, this not being the only film, what are you excited to see him do?
James Bond.
James Bond, yeah.
Dead presidents, obviously.
I guess it's due in this day and age for an update.
What, Dead Presidents?
Yeah, that was. You should really not do that movie. I'm just saying, it was done perfectly the first time. I have no idea how I came up with that reference either. I'm not regretting it.
What I'm excited to see Paul do.
Yeah.
I think that, the reason First of all, it's important to say that we've all known each other for 10 years. So when we have to be nice about each other, it's really awkward. So that's that.
We could go the other way if you want.
What, and just rip
Yeah, just rag on him.
Excited to
if you
see
want,
Carrie do.
Bond.
And Jake.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, when Paul and Zoe sent me the script, I read it and called them back about an hour and a half later and thanked them for the privilege of getting to work on it. And I feel that tenfold, having been through the experience and loving every second of it. And I do think there is this remarkable skill that Paul just has. But I think also his goodness as a person is what permeates the set and makes people happy to be at work, which also makes a great film. But the reason I wanted to work with Paul, not just because of this beautiful script, was that everything that Paul touches is honest. And in his work, no matter what the genre is, he's always the most truthful thing about it. So I think whatever Paul goes on to direct, it will just ring true in some way to someone. I think, you know, as long as he's carrying on telling true stories, I think they'll just be completely compelling and brilliant to watch.
But I will say, just as an aside, we're living in a time where that's not always appreciated. Mm-hmm. And films like this are really not easy to get made and then to get seen. And it's a completely different time for a filmmaker like Paul. And we can talk about what he will do and what we will want him to do. But in truth, I think, in order to see more of what he has to say and what Zoe has to say and what Carrie has to say in these types of films, it needs all of us together. I mean, because I have this feeling that it's being taken from us somehow. And it doesn't matter what medium it's in. It doesn't matter how we're watching it, and we can have that conversation, and I've had that many times, and everybody's, you know, who cares how it's seen? It needs to be made, and we need to know what's going on in everyone's mind. And this kind of truth and this kind of stillness is rare nowadays, and I hope for more of it from Paul, and will do everything I can to make sure that he can continue to do it, and I hope we all will too.
That's a great note to end this on. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming. Yeah.